Yo, what is going on, guys? It is boy Nick here, back again with a brand new video today. So this is now the 8th episode of my new series, in which I review every single Sony Spider-Man Universe film up to the release of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Today we're going to be reviewing Venom, There Be Carnage, which was directed by Andy Serkis and came out in 2021. So once again, Tom Hardy is fantastic as Eddie Brock in Venom. I really like the way that this movie decides to continue the story, because like the way that we see them at the ending of the first movie, it does a great job of continuing when we last saw them. And the thing that I like about the storyline between these characters in this movie is that in the last one we kind of see how the two of them are like very polar opposite people who have to work together. And we kind of see like near the ending they're in this whole thing of like we need to work together to like be one person, not do things, and like here's how you don't do dumb things. And so I kind of feel like in this movie they do a pretty good job at showing how there was going to be conflict with that, how Eddie and Venom were never always going to be on the same page, how there was going to be fights and conflicts. And so I feel like they do a good job of actually like elaborating on that. What I like about this story about the two of them having their issues is that they kind of realize their purpose for being latched onto each other. And for the way that the story goes, I think that Eddie is a lot more likable in this one. He's kind of worked through some of his issues that he had in the first one, and he's trying to become a better person, so he's infinitely a lot more likable, I feel like. And also with Venom, like Venom's still a mess, but he's like slowly becoming a little bit more heroic, and I think that it's kind of funny to see Venom do his own thing and interesting, but I don't know, it's kind of cool to see like the Venom symbiote actually have an arc of its own. This movie still has the humor and the funny banter of the first one, which is always a plus. I love watching the bromance between Eddie and Venom in this one. It's still entertaining as ever. Woody Harrelson is great and really creepy as Cletus Cassidy. I think first and foremost, Woody Harrelson plays the unhinged aspect of Cletus Cassidy very, very well. He's very like amazingly creepy throughout the whole movie, and Woody Harrelson is like, the performance is just so much more memorable. I think he was very well cast for this role. I kind of felt like Riz Ahmed was kind of miscast for Carlton Drake in the first one. And honestly, in this movie, the villain's so much better. I think Woody Harrelson does a great job. He makes for a much better villain than Carlton Drake or Riot, as I've already said. And something that I appreciate about Carnage in this movie that they didn't do with Riot was that this film gives this character a lot more screen time, and so he develops a lot better than Riot. Because with Riot in the first Venom, it's like we see him at the beginning, and then we kind of don't see him for a while, and then we see him a little bit more towards the end of the middle to the end. And this one, we actually get to see a lot more screen time with Carnage, so we actually get a more better realized villain. Naomi Harris is also pretty good as Frances Barrison or Shriek. I think she and Cletus are a very menacing Bonnie and Clyde type duo, because like they're kind of like perfect for each other in a way, and they're both amazingly creepy. They're both really menacing. I think they make for much more risk-taking villains than Riot did. I think that like they're just overall much more memorable and fun presence on camera than Riot was in the first Venom. Michelle Williams is still pretty good as Anne. She has some great moments even with some of the limited screen time. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a spoiler section I do closer to the end of the video. But I think Michelle Williams' performance is still pretty good. And yeah, she has a couple good moments in the movie that I really enjoy, even though her screen time is limited. The visual effects are still fantastic. I think that Venom and Carnage look fantastic, not just in the symbiotic fashion, but also whenever they're like in suit mode, if you know what I mean. One of my complaints with the first one is that there's a couple frames where the symbiote in the first Venom looks a little bit rubbery. From when I rewatched it last night, I couldn't really find any of that. I felt like the symbiote looked so much better. I didn't see any frames where it looked a bit rubbery or a bit too fake. I feel like the symbiote and the suit for both Venom and Carnage looked fantastic. I think the CGI team did a better job in this one. Also, the action sequences are just so much better. One of my complaints for the first Venom is that there's some fun moments with action, but the action sequences are not overly memorable. This one, they're a lot more memorable because like I feel like the scenes play a better part in the story than in the first one, and I also feel like the choreography and the actual direction from Andy Serkis just is superior to the stuff in the first one. The fight between Venom and Carnage in the third act is awesome. It's infinitely more memorable than the one between Venom and Riot. I think it's just like it's so much more visually appealing, and the choreography and some really cool stuff they do with the characters and the symbiotes is just like, it's so cool to look at. And there's also one other scene where it's Carnage in prison where they actually take a little bit of a risk for a PG-13 rating. You actually kind of get to see Carnage go and just like destroy stuff. Now, I know some people who wanted an R-rated Venom wanted to see Carnage like do crazy stuff with a lot of like graphic stuff, which that's not in this movie, but they do take some risks in the sense of you actually get to see Carnage like go beast mode. This film overall is much more memorable than the first one. It's not like a perfect movie or anything like that. I will go into the flaws later, and this is not a masterpiece of a superhero movie, but it's a lot more memorable and it's very fun for what it is. This movie moves at a very nice brisk pace, with the movie only being an hour and a half long. The first one was just a little bit under 2 hours. This one being an hour and a half. I kind of felt like skeptical when I found out it was that short, because I felt like it wasn't going to have enough time to develop stuff. And that is a little bit true, but I actually feel like the story actually flows together pretty well. I feel like it's very consistent in terms of the tone, and in terms of like how nicely everything flows together. And I feel like everything is a lot more realized in this version of Venom. Some other stuff I really like is that the soundtrack is still pretty good. The first soundtrack had a lot of hip-hop and some stuff that I liked, and there was the Eminem song I really liked from it. The soundtrack in this one is, we don't have as many memorable songs, but I do think it is still pretty good. We actually have some classical music played in there, which is nice. And also the Last One Standing song from the soundtrack that they play during the credits is great. I think the soundtrack is still pretty good. There's another F-bomb in this movie like there was in the first one. I think this one is used perfectly. I kind of forget the F-bomb that they used in the first Venom. I remember it's there. I kind of forgot what it was, though. This one was used so much more better. It was used perfectly, and I think for the scene, it's like, that's a risk I like. And last thing I've written down for the stuff I like is that the mid-credit scene, which I will talk about later, is a must-watch. Even if you don't care for Venom, you must see the mid-credit scene for this one. This mid-credit scene alone is worth price of admission. So even though I do really like Venom Let There Be Carnage, I do think it is better than the first Venom in nearly every way. I do have some flaws with it. As I said, this is a fun movie. It's a great time, but it's not a perfect superhero movie. It's not a masterpiece, so I will go through the flaws. The villains are well acted and fun, and they're a lot more memorable than Riot. However, the story between the two of them is not explored very deeply, so I felt like the story could have been a lot more compelling. They are very memorable in the sense of they're well acted and their presence is a lot more memorable, but the actual story, I felt like could have used some more depth. So that's my complaint with the villain. And also, this film can feel a bit choppy when it comes to how it like goes, because it does kind of go back and forth between the stuff going on with Eddie, the stuff going on with Venom, and the two of them being separate but, you know, in a rocky spot, and then also the stuff going on with Woody Harrelson's character and Carnage. So there's not like an overabundance of characters or stories like Spider-Man 3 or anything, but it does have a few different stories going on at the same time, so because it kind of cuts back and forth between a lot of them, it can feel a bit choppy, but I still think for the most part, it does the stories justice by going through them pretty nice and easy. And as I said, there's some great moments for a lot of the characters where I kind of feel like there's not a whole lot of depth, which is one of the things I feel like I would have liked a little bit more. I feel like I would have liked had there been just a little bit more depth with some of the characters, but there's still some great moments nonetheless I think are definitely worth checking out. As I said earlier, I like the stuff that they do with Anne in this movie, and I want to talk about that during the spoiler part of the review. And those scenes I like with Anne, I really do like. I kind of wish she had some more screen time, though, because one of my favorite things about the first Venom was the dynamic between Eddie and Anne, how they had this like interesting kind of like they're not together anymore, but they still care for each other relationship. And I feel like they do that in this one, but we see Anne just like a little bit at the beginning, and then we don't really see her through the middle, and then we see her more towards the last act of the movie. And so the moments that she's there are great moments. I kind of wish we would have just seen her a little bit more, because I really liked what they did with her in the first one. I kind of wish in the second one they did more with her. As I said, this movie is just 90 minutes of a great time. I think anyone who goes to this movie to have fun is going to have a great time, but Venom is an acquired taste, kind of like I said in the first one. If you went to this movie to see Venom just like wreck stuff and to see an R-rated Venom, then this movie's going to disappoint you. And they do play a little bit safe with the PG-13 rating, but I think that like if you just go to this movie for a fun time and like the acquired taste fits your niche, I think you're going to have a great time with this movie. Stephen Graham, interestingly enough, who's in this movie, he's kind of funny as Detective Mulligan, and there's some interesting like scenes with him, but he's not very memorable, mainly due to the lack of screen time, and I felt like his character could have been more memorable had they given him more stuff to do. And I've heard that apparently this character in the comics is supposed to be like the next villain or something like that, so I don't know. If that's the case, I feel like he didn't have enough screen time in this movie, but, you know, that's something that I can kind of overlook because a lot of the other stuff is still pretty fun. The PG-13 rating does play it kind of safe, like I said, so if you weren't satisfied with the first one, the second one, you might dislike less than the first one, but still probably not going to win you over if you wanted that real risk. There are a couple risks in this movie. And something else I've written down, I had this issue with the first one, I've also had it with The Amazing Spider-Man, is that the dark colors of the nighttime scenes seem like a weird choice considering that the colors for Venom and Carnage are dark colors. Venom's black, and Carnage is like I don't know about dark red, but it's kind of like like kind of a little bit of a dark red mixed with black, and then like a little bit of gray in there. So because these are like very dark looking characters, it's weird to have the scenes take place at nighttime. You still get some great action sequences in the lights, because there's some light moments within the action sequences that look awesome, but with the night sky against the background, it does feel a bit awkward that they decided to do that. So before I go into my rating and grade, I do want to talk about some spoilers real quickly. If you have not seen this movie, I do recommend it, and if you want to avoid spoilers, skip over this chapter and go to my rating and grade at the end where I won't talk spoilers. So the first spoiler I want to talk about is I really like the scene of the convenience store with Anne and Venom. It was a funny moment for me because it was kind of fun to see Anne kind of like feed into Venom's ego by like flirting with him, but at the same time it was also kind of it was a nice scene, I feel like, from the way that the first movie goes into the second movie, where you see how like the characters progress in the sense of like Anne is aware of how crazy Venom and Eddie are and how like they're two completely separate people, and so it's cool to see Anne actually apply a lot to the story by convincing Venom to go back to Eddie. I really appreciated that aspect of the story. The other thing I love about this scene was Venom making fun of Dan, who is Anne's fiance in this film. And that felt like an appropriate joke because he's not a bad character, but Dan's also in the first one, which I never mentioned, by the way. So he's like the boyfriend in the first one, he's the fiance here, and Dan's not a bad character. He's just not very memorable, and that's the weird thing. Is that I remember Anne going and moving past Eddie, but I don't remember her fiance. And so I kind of feel like whenever they make the joke of Dan in this movie, it feels appropriate, because it kind of feels like a jab at something wrong they did with the first one, so I appreciate that joke. It's just funny, and I feel like within the context of these movies, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I also like the scene where Venom is inside the body of Anne, and Eddie has to apologize to him. I like this scene because it's kind of cool to see Eddie and Venom like get back together, and it's kind of like an inspiring moment for the two of them, but I also like it because I feel like when Eddie was apologizing to Venom, he was also kind of apologizing to Anne for a lot of the problems they had, and so I kind of felt like it was a very like awkward, funny scene, but at the same time, it kind of felt like a nice, sweet scene, like. So if you actually like look at it from a service level standpoint, it's like, it's whatever. When you think more deeply about it, it's like, no, that's a nice scene. I'm glad they put that in there for these characters. I also think the scene where Eddie thanks Dan for helping them solve this scenario is a good scene. I like that Eddie's actually like warming up to Dan, or he's like, I can move past this whole thing going on with Anne. But the fact that Venom made Eddie slap Dan, I thought was super funny. I thought that was an awesome scene. I also love the scene at the end of the battle where Venom overcomes Eddie and he eats Carnage. It's fun. It's a funny scene, and that's where they use the F-bomb, where it's like, this guy, and he eats him. I thought that was perfectly placed, but also it felt like a satisfying end to that character, but also it was an actual risk they took. That was another risk in this movie they took. I liked the scene where Carnage was going and wrecking people in the prison, but I also like the scene where Eddie's trying to talk to Cletus, and then Venom comes over and is like, okay, like, I promise I wouldn't eat people, but this guy deserves it, so I'm gonna eat him. It actually felt like a risk, and I feel like we maybe could get an R-rated Venom off of a scene like that. Now, of course, this is the big spoiler I was gonna talk about. I talked about the mid-credit scene being a must-watch. So, when I went and I saw this film in theaters, I actually didn't see this movie for, like, almost a whole month, because I just, like, got busy, so I didn't see it until the end of the month it came out. However, when I saw that mid-credit scene where Eddie and Venom are at Paradise, and they're taking some time to have fun. They're chilling in the room, and something weird happens, and the TV comes on, and we see J. Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons, and we see Tom Holland's Spider-Man on the TV. That scene from the ending of Spider-Man Far From Home in this movie. I could not tell you how ecstatic I was when I saw that. There was a row of teenagers sitting in front of me and my dad when we went and saw this in theaters, and they were just going nuts for it. Because it was just that thing where it's like, we're actually doing this. We're actually seeing things outside of the MCU tie in with the MCU. And to see that guy come out the bathroom and go, what are you doing in my room? It's like confirmation of multiverse stuff. So it was cool to see the multiverse like come together like that. And it's just like, oh, it's such a cool scene. And considering what we ended up seeing with Spider-Man No Way Home, it was just like the cherry on top for this movie. I really love that scene. And like, I do think this movie is actually very good outside that post-credit scene. It's just a cool little scene where it's like, we're doing this. We're doing this. I thought that was awesome. So yeah, I'm glad that they put that in there. In the end, Venom: Let There Be Carnage is a very fun movie. It's not a superhero masterpiece or anything, but for the hour and a half of fun that it is, it's definitely worth checking out. If you liked the first Venom, you're definitely going to like this one more, in my opinion. And if you didn't like the first Venom, I still would recommend checking it out because I think you'll dislike it less, but I think you might actually be like, okay, they actually did a couple things differently, better than the first one, so you might think, this one's fine if you decide to watch it. So in the end, this is not a superhero masterpiece, but it is a fun time when you do watch it. I feel like it sits in a comfortable spot within the other superhero movies. I'm going to give Venom: Let There Be Carnage an overall rating of an 8.4 out of 10, which might seem like kind of like an odd rating, but I've given this rating to a couple other movies, and I think that it's a fun movie for what it is. It's not a masterpiece, but when you watch it, you have a really good time, and I'm going to give it an overall grade of a B+. So I've given this rating and grade to a couple other movies before. I gave it to Black Widow and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which I think those are better movies than this movie. But I gave this rating grade to those movies because I kind of felt like those are movies where there was some stuff they could have done better, but for the actual things they did, they do them pretty well. And it's entertaining when you watch them, so I feel like this is an appropriate grade and rating for that. I think it's definitely better than the first Venom, and I actually think it's better than Spider-Man 3, which might seem like a controversial opinion, but that is my opinion about this movie. So that was my review for Venom: Let There Be Carnage. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Next week I will have a review for Morbius, which is my final video in the series up until I go and see Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse on opening night. I can't wait to talk about that. Morbius will be an interesting movie to review, because you know. Yeah, I will have a video coming out this weekend for Miss Marvel. I'm currently halfway through that show. I'm really enjoying it. I can't wait to talk about that. And also, I decided that I was going to do on Friday, I will have a spoiler review for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I wasn't originally going to do that, but I realized it would be a good idea to do that after it was referenced to me from a friend that you should probably do this. So I will put that on Friday. I'm putting it on Friday because by then the movie will have been out for 2 weeks. So at that point, I feel like everyone will have had enough time to see it. Yeah, I think that's going to be it for the video today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys want to see some more content of me reviewing this kind of stuff, I have a playlist somewhere on the screen where you can watch my reviews for my MCU reviews, for TV shows I'm reviewing, as well for the Sony Spider-Man Universe movies. So go check out those playlists. If you want to support the channel, make sure that you hit the like button and feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified about those videos. Thank you guys so much as always for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. And yeah, that's been it. Peace.